Daniel and I were what people called the perfect couple. Our friends envied our connection, and even casual acquaintances would comment on how well we complemented each other. Daniel was the quiet, steady one, a data analyst with a love for numbers and an almost obsessive curiosity about patterns. I, on the other hand, brought the energy and spontaneity to our relationship. Together, we balanced each other in a way that felt effortless, natural. I still remember the night he proposed. We'd hiked to the top of a hill to watch a meteor shower, something we both loved. The sky lit up with streaks of light, and Daniel, in his understated way, knelt down and asked me to be his forever. It was the easiest yes of my life. I was 25. Sure, I'd found the kind of love people write about. Now, 3 years into our marriage, that love remains steady. But something inside me feels unsettled. It's not about Daniel. He's everything I could ask for. It's about me. As a psychologist, I spend my days studying human behavior and relationships. And lately, I've been questioning my own. Did I settle down too soon? Am I missing something I can't quite articulate? These thoughts creep in, uninvited, making me wonder if perfection is as simple as it seems, or if it's even enough. It started as a harmless curiosity, just an academic fascination with how relationships evolve. As a psychologist, I often lose myself in studies about human behavior, particularly the ways people navigate love and intimacy. I'd read about societies where monogamy wasn't the norm, where relationships were fluid and flexible, designed to grow with the people in them. The idea intrigued me. How much of what we consider normal is just something we've been taught, rather than something we've truly chosen for ourselves? I loved Daniel. That wasn't the question. He was my partner, my steady anchor in a chaotic world. But there was a restlessness I couldn't ignore, a whisper in the back of my mind reminding me of all the paths I hadn't walked. I married at 25, swept up in the joy of finding my person. I never stopped to consider what I might be giving up by committing so fully, so young. Not other people, necessarily, but the freedom to explore, to experiment, to figure out who I was outside of us. I didn't see these thoughts as a threat to our marriage. If anything, I thought they were a testament to its strength. Daniel and I had always been open with each other, discussing everything from politics to philosophy, to our own vulnerabilities. Surely, I thought, we could talk about this too. It wasn't dissatisfaction, it was curiosity. I wanted to know if he'd ever wondered what life might look like outside the neat, traditional box we'd built together. Still, I couldn't ignore the risk. Daniel wasn't the type to flirt with unconventional ideas. He liked structure, rules, and reliability. He'd been burned before. His ex-fiancée's betrayal was proof of how much he valued trust. But wasn't our relationship built on that same trust? I believed we were strong enough to handle a conversation like this, to explore the edges of our comfort zone without losing what made us solid. At least, that's what I told myself. The more I thought about it, the more I convinced myself this was just another topic to explore. Like so many we'd tackled before. I wasn't looking for an open relationship, not really. I just wanted to understand if people could truly separate love from desire, intimacy from exclusivity. Could we grow together by allowing a little freedom? Or would even asking the question plant a seed of doubt that could never be uprooted? I didn't have the answers, but I was desperate to find out. The night I brought it up, the air felt heavy, like the weight of my own thoughts had settled into the room. Daniel and I were having dinner at home, a quiet evening like so many others. I'd been turning the idea over in my mind for weeks, rehearsing how I might approach it. This wasn't dissatisfaction. I loved him more than anything. It was curiosity, a question I couldn't let go of. Could a marriage evolve, grow, and still hold space for adventure? We'd always prided ourselves on our honesty. From the beginning, we promised to be open with each other, no matter how difficult the conversation might be. That promise gave me courage as I broached the topic. I started carefully, talking about how societal norms around relationships had changed over time. I explained how my studies showed that what was once considered scandalous often became normal as people evolved. Daniel listened, as he always did, with his quiet attentiveness, nodding occasionally as I spoke. But when I shifted the conversation to us, suggesting that some couples explore open relationships to keep things exciting and fulfilling, his expression changed. His fork hovered mid-air, and for a moment I thought he hadn't heard me. Then his eyes locked on mine, filled with disbelief. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice calm but edged with something I couldn't quite place. I rushed to explain. "It's not that I'm unhappy or that there's anything wrong with us. I love what we have, but we're still young, and I've been thinking about how relationships grow. Some couples try this, and it strengthens their bond. It's just an idea, something we could talk about." He set his fork down, leaning back in his chair. "Why would you want to open our relationship? Aren't you satisfied with me? Is there something I'm not giving you?" "No," I said quickly, my voice almost trembling. "This isn't about you, Daniel. It's about us, about the future. I want us to explore together, not because something's missing, but because we have such a strong foundation." His frown deepened. He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching mine. Then he said, "I can't believe you'd even suggest this, after everything." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. I tried to reassure him, to explain that I wasn't asking for anything drastic, just a conversation. But it was clear I'd crossed a line I hadn't even known was there. The man who'd always been my rock now looked at me like I was a stranger. And for the first time in our marriage, I felt the ground beneath us start to shift. I knew Daniel had a painful history with trust, but I hadn't realized just how deep his scars ran. That night, as I tried to bridge the growing gap between us, I saw a side of him I'd never seen before. Raw, vulnerable, and defensive. It was as if the walls he'd built long before I met him had come crashing down, and he was standing there, exposed. "I thought we were different," he said, his voice quiet but trembling with emotion. "You know what happened with Lisa? You know. How could you even bring this up?" Lisa. Her name hadn't come up in years, but now it hung between us like a shadow. Before me, Lisa had been his world, a high school sweetheart turned fiancée. He had told me about how he'd planned the perfect proposal, recreating their first date in her backyard. But when he came home early to surprise her, he found her in bed with his best friend. The betrayal shattered him. He'd spent years rebuilding himself, cautiously piecing his heart back together, one careful step at a time. "I'm not Lisa," I said softly, my heart aching as I watched him struggle. "I would never betray you like that, Daniel. This isn't the same." "It feels the same," he snapped, his voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. "The idea of you wanting someone else. It's like reliving that nightmare all over again." I wanted to reach out, to hold him, but he stepped back, shaking his head as if to clear it. His pain was a living thing, clawing its way to the surface, and I didn't know how to soothe it. This isn't about betrayal, I tried again, desperate to make him understand. I love you, Daniel. You're my whole world. I was just curious. That's all. It wasn't meant to hurt you. He let out a bitter laugh, his hands gripping the edge of the counter as if to steady himself. Curiosity. That's all it takes to throw everything we've built into question. I gave you my trust, Evelyn. Do you know how hard that was for me? Do you? I didn't know what to say. I thought we could talk about anything, that our bond was unshakable. But now I realized how much his past still held him captive. To him, this wasn't a theoretical discussion. It was a betrayal of the very foundation of our marriage. I thought we were stronger than this, he said finally, his voice breaking. I thought we were different. Daniel's footsteps echoed down the hall as he stormed out of the kitchen, his face set in a look of pain and disbelief I'd never seen before. I followed him, my heart racing, trying to fix what felt like a crumbling bridge between us. Daniel, wait, I called. But he didn't stop. He pushed open the bathroom door, his movements tense and deliberate. When I saw the glint of gold in his hand, our wedding rings, my chest tightened. What are you doing? I asked, my voice cracking as I stepped closer. He didn't answer. Instead, he stood over the toilet, holding the rings out in front of him, his hand trembling slightly. Is this what you want, Evelyn? He asked, his voice low but laced with anger. To throw everything away? To cheapen everything we've built? No, I said, panic rising in my throat. That's not what I meant. I love you, Daniel. I don't want to lose you. He looked at me then, his eyes full of hurt and betrayal. You don't want to lose me, but you want to share me? You want to share us? He shook his head, letting out a bitter laugh. I gave you everything. My trust, my love, my life. And this is what I get in return. Please, just listen to me, I pleaded, stepping closer. It wasn't about replacing what we have. I was just trying to understand if we could. Stop, he said sharply, his voice breaking. You've said enough. Before I could say another word, he opened his hand. I watched in horror as our ring slipped through his fingers and splashed into the water. No! I lunged forward, but it was too late. He flushed the toilet, the sound drowning out my cries as the rings disappeared. I stood there frozen, staring at the empty bowl, unable to process what had just happened. Daniel let out a shaky breath and turned to me, his face a mix of anger and despair. There, he said. You're free now. Free to figure out whatever it is you think you're missing. Daniel, please, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. I didn't mean for it to come to this. I don't want freedom. I want you. But he just shook his head, his jaw clenched tight. You wanted a door open, Evelyn? Well, you've opened it. I hope you find what you're looking for. He walked past me, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. I followed him to the front door, my voice breaking as I begged him to stay. He didn't stop. The door slammed behind him, leaving me alone in the silence, staring at the empty space where he'd just been. For the first time, I realized that what I thought was a harmless idea had torn something deep and sacred between us. And now, I had no idea how to fix it, or if I even could. The house felt unbearably empty after Daniel left. Every creak of the floorboards, every soft hum of the refrigerator seemed to mock me. I sat at the kitchen table staring at my hands, still red from gripping the bathroom door in desperation. My wedding ring was gone, flushed away like it meant nothing. But it did mean something to both of us. Or at least it had. I tried calling him that night. Once, twice, 3 times. Each one went unanswered. My messages ignored. My words felt hollow, and I wondered if they even mattered anymore. "Daniel, please come home. Let's talk about this. I didn't mean to hurt you. I love you." But love wasn't enough, was it? Not when I had shattered something fundamental between us. The next day, I reached out to his closest friend Matt, hoping for some insight. "He's staying here," Matt confirmed reluctantly, his voice guarded. "But Evelyn, he's not ready to talk. Give him space." Space. It felt like a chasm, widening with every second of silence from Daniel. In the days that followed, I found myself replaying our argument over and over in my head. Had I been too careless with my words? Too blind to his pain? I had always admired how thoughtful Daniel was, how deeply he cared, but I hadn't considered how fragile trust could be when touched by past wounds. I hadn't understood how much my curiosity could feel like a betrayal. Friends offered conflicting advice. "You just need to explain yourself better," one said. Another insisted, "He's overreacting. He'll come around." But deep down, I knew this wasn't a simple misunderstanding. For Daniel, this wasn't just about the idea of an open relationship. It was about everything he thought we stood for. Commitment, loyalty, United States. When I wasn't overthinking, I was crying. The sight of his coffee mug on the counter, or his jacket hanging by the door, sent fresh waves of regret crashing over me. Nights were the worst. I'd lie in bed, staring at the empty space beside me, feeling the weight of his absence. Sleep came in fragments, haunted by dreams of Daniel walking out the door, his back turned, the sound of the rings disappearing in the flush echoing in my mind. I tried to convince myself it was just a fight, that in time, he'd come home, and we'd work through this together. But as the days stretched into a week, doubt began to creep in. What if he couldn't forgive me? What if this was the beginning of the end? I had promised him honesty, but I hadn't anticipated the cost of it. Every moment without him felt like a punishment, one I deserved but didn't know how to endure. And yet I clung to a fragile hope that Daniel still loved me enough to come back, even if the pieces of what we had would never fit together the same way again. When Daniel finally replied to my messages, it wasn't the reconciliation I had hoped for. His response was brief, distant, and heartbreakingly cold. "Hey, Evelyn, you probably know I've been staying with Matt. I still need time to think before we talk. I'm still upset about our fight and don't know exactly how to feel about it. Please understand. Thank you for your patience. Bye." I read it over and over, searching for something, anything, that sounded like the man I married. It wasn't there. His words were mechanical, stripped of warmth, as though I was a stranger intruding on his life. Still, it was a reply, the first sign of life in the void he had left. I told myself it was a step forward, that he just needed time. He always said he needed space to process things, and I had promised to respect that. But the days felt endless, and the silence between us grew louder. Every night, I replayed our last moments together, hoping to find the key to undo the damage. The look on his face when he flushed our wedding rings was seared into my memory, a mixture of anger, betrayal, and despair. I wanted to reach out, to tell him I didn't mean for things to spiral this way, that I wasn't trying to hurt him. But every time I picked up my phone, His last words echoed in my mind. Please understand. I tried to be patient, but my heart was restless. The idea that he might never come back began to take root. An unwelcome thought I couldn't shake. Every creak of the front door, every sound of a car pulling up outside sent my heart racing. But it was never him. A week later, the door finally opened. I was in the living room, staring blankly at the television when I heard the sound of the lock turning. I shot to my feet, hope surging, only to see Daniel standing there with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He looked surprised to see me, as if he hadn't expected me to still be waiting. I just need to grab some clothes, he said flatly, avoiding my gaze. Daniel, please, I began, my voice trembling. We need to talk. He didn't stop moving, heading straight for the bedroom. I followed him, desperate to close the distance between us. Can we just sit down? I didn't mean... Evelyn, he cut me off, his tone exhausted. I'm not ready. I just need my things. Watching him pack was like watching a stranger. He folded his clothes with the same precision he always had. But there was no warmth, no care in his movements. He didn't look at me once, even when I stood right in front of him. Are you ever coming back? I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He stopped for a moment, his hand hovering over the zipper of his bag. I'll try, he said, then slung the bag over his shoulder and walked out. The door closed behind him, and with it, the faint light of hope I'd been clinging to. I collapsed onto the bed, the weight of his absence crushing me. It wasn't a no, but it wasn't a yes either. It was limbo, cold, empty, and unbearable. A week after Daniel's quick visit, I finally heard from him, but not in the way I'd hoped. A phone call from Matt's girlfriend shattered the fragile calm I'd been trying to hold on to. Evelyn, she began hesitantly. I thought you should know. Daniel's been talking about your fight. A lot. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? I asked, gripping the edge of the table. She sighed. He told everyone about the open relationship, the rings, everything. It's all out there. And, Evelyn, it doesn't sound like him. He's hurt, more than I think even he realizes. I barely registered the rest of the conversation. My mind was stuck on the image of Daniel, my private, reserved husband, spilling the most personal details of our lives to his friends. It felt like a betrayal. The man who once hated even small gossip was now painting me as the villain in his story, as though I'd committed some unspeakable crime. I hung up, my hands trembling with a mixture of anger and despair. Picking up my phone, I typed out a message, each word sharp and cutting in my frustration. I don't understand what's happening to you. You never acted like this before. Why can't you talk to me instead of airing our personal life to everyone else? You're my husband, Daniel. You owe me a conversation. If you don't come home tonight, I'll call a lawyer tomorrow. I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over send. Part of me knew it was a mistake, an ultimatum born of desperation, but I couldn't help myself. I hit send and waited, my heart pounding. He read the message almost instantly, but no reply came. Not that night. Not the next morning. The silence felt deafening, and the weight of it settled on my chest like a stone. The next few days passed in a blur of tears and unanswered calls. I vacillated between anger at him for refusing to talk to me and guilt for starting this mess in the first place. I hadn't meant for any of this to happen. It was just a conversation, an idea. But somehow it had grown into a chasm I couldn't see a way across. When the divorce papers arrived, I felt a cold, sinking finality. I wasn't ready for this, not for the end of us. I thought about tearing them up, refusing to believe this was how our story ended. But deep down, I knew Daniel was serious. He wasn't just hurt. He was broken, and I was the one who had broken him. Weeks passed. The divorce papers sat untouched on the table, a grim reminder of the distance between us. I couldn't bring myself to sign them. Not yet. It felt like giving up, and I wasn't ready to let go. I finally decided to take a step I'd avoided. Therapy. If Daniel wasn't ready to talk to me, maybe I needed to start by understanding myself. The therapist was kind but unflinchingly honest. "You say you suggested an open relationship out of curiosity," she said during our second session. "But what were you really looking for? Was it curiosity? Or was it fear? Fear of settling, of monotony?" Her words struck a chord. I'd been so focused on Daniel's reaction that I hadn't truly examined my own motives. I loved him, that much was certain. But deep down, I realized I had been grappling with my own fears about what marriage meant. Was I scared of becoming stagnant? Of losing some undefined part of myself? The answers weren't clear, but for the first time, I began to see that this wasn't just about Daniel's pain. It was about mine too. Meanwhile, Daniel wasn't completely silent. Through mutual friends, I heard snippets of his life. He was still staying with Matt, going to work, and keeping up appearances. But Matt mentioned that he seemed withdrawn, almost robotic. "He's not himself," Matt told me one day. "I think he's trying to figure out if he can ever forgive what happened." Forgiveness. The word hung heavy in my mind. Was forgiveness even possible when trust had been broken so deeply? I wanted to believe it was, but I didn't know how to reach him. Every attempt I'd made so far had only pushed him further away. Then, one afternoon, I received a message from Daniel. It was short like his last one, but it was enough to send my heart racing. "I'm ready to talk. Let's meet tomorrow." I stared at the screen, equal parts relieved and terrified. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, but I wasn't sure if I was prepared. What would he say? Would he still see me as the woman he'd fallen in love with? Or had I become someone unrecognizable to him? The next day, I sat in the cafe where we'd agreed to meet, my hands shaking around a mug of untouched coffee. When Daniel arrived, he looked different. Thinner, his eyes tired and guarded. He sat down without a word, his expression unreadable. "Thank you for coming," I said softly. He nodded, but didn't speak right away. Finally, he broke the silence. "Evelyn, I need to understand something. Why? Why did you feel the need to even bring this up? Was I not enough for you?" The pain in his voice was unmistakable, and it cut through me like a knife. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "It was never about you not being enough, Daniel. You are everything to me. I brought it up because I've been struggling. With myself, with the idea of what marriage is supposed to be. I got scared, and I thought, maybe we could explore something new together. But I see now how wrong I was." His eyes searched mine, looking for something. Truth, maybe, or reassurance. "Do you know what it felt like to hear you say that? To feel like our life together wasn't enough for you?" Tears filled my eyes as I reached across the table, my hand hovering near his but not touching. "I was wrong, Daniel. I see that now. I don't want anyone else. I just want us. I'm so sorry." For a long moment he didn't respond. Then he leaned back, crossing his arms. "I don't know if I can move past this, Evelyn. I want to, but I don't know how." His words were honest, raw, and they terrified me. But they were also a glimmer of hope. He wanted to try, even if he didn't know how. And for now, that was enough to keep me fighting for what we'd almost lost. The days following our conversation were tense, a fragile truce hovering between us. Daniel agreed to move back into the house, but it was clear we were far from where we used to be. He didn't unpack his bag fully, as though he wasn't sure he'd stay. And he kept his distance, speaking only when necessary. I gave him space, hoping time would bridge the gap between us. We decided to attend couples therapy, a step I suggested, and Daniel reluctantly agreed to. Our first session was uncomfortable. Sitting across from him, I felt exposed, as if the therapist could see every crack in our marriage. Daniel spoke cautiously, his words measured, but they carried a weight that was hard to ignore. I felt like everything we had was a lie, he said at one point, his voice steady, but his hands clenched into fists. Evelyn's suggestion wasn't just about an open relationship. It was about her questioning us. I've already been betrayed once. I don't know if I can go through that again. Hearing him say it aloud broke something inside me. I realized just how deeply my words had cut him, how they had reopened old wounds I hadn't fully understood. I wasn't questioning us, I said softly, tears welling up. I was questioning myself. I didn't know how to talk about what I was feeling, and I made a terrible mistake. But I never stopped loving you, Daniel. I never will. The therapist guided us through the session, helping us unpack the layers of hurt and misunderstanding. It wasn't easy. Daniel's pain was raw, and I could see how hard it was for him to trust me again. But for the first time, we were talking. Not just to hurt each other, but to understand. Over the next few weeks, therapy became a lifeline. We learned to communicate in ways we hadn't before, to confront the fears and insecurities that had been buried beneath the surface of our marriage. Daniel began to share more of his feelings, admitting how Lisa's betrayal had shaped his view of love and trust. I opened up about my fear of losing myself in the routine of marriage, of feeling like I'd settled too soon without fully understanding what I wanted. These sessions weren't a quick fix. Every step forward felt fragile, like walking on thin ice. Some days, Daniel would withdraw, retreating into his thoughts, and leaving me wondering if we'd ever find our way back to each other. Other days, he'd surprise me with small gestures, making my favorite breakfast or asking how my day was. Reminders of the man I'd fallen in love with. One evening, we sat outside on the porch, a place we'd always shared on quiet nights. The air was cool, and the stars above seemed brighter than usual. For a while, we just sat there in silence, the distance between us feeling smaller than it had in weeks. "I'm trying," Daniel said finally, his voice breaking the stillness. "I'm trying to forgive, to trust again. I don't know if I'll ever forget what happened, but I don't want to lose us." Tears filled my eyes as I turned to him. "Neither do I. I'll do whatever it takes, Daniel. I'm so sorry for everything I put you through." For the first time in what felt like forever, he reached for my hand. His touch was tentative, but it was there, a sign that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild what had been broken. In that moment, under the vast expanse of stars, I felt the smallest spark of hope, a fragile light that we might still find our way back to each other. Months later, our lives had settled into something resembling normalcy. The road to rebuilding our marriage was anything but smooth. Therapy became a cornerstone for us, a space where we could speak openly, even when the words hurt. There were days when the weight of our past felt unbearable, when Daniel's silences cut deeper than his words ever could. But there were also moments of warmth, small victories, like laughing together over an old joke or cooking dinner side by side. Those moments reminded me of what we were fighting for. One evening, Daniel came home with something unexpected. 2 simple gold bands, replacements for the ones we'd lost. He placed them on the kitchen table, his expression unreadable. "I thought we could start over," he said quietly. My breath caught as I picked up the smaller ring, turning it over in my fingers. It wasn't identical to the one he'd flushed away, but in a way that made it even more meaningful. It symbolized not just our past, but our decision to rebuild something new. "I'd like that," I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. That weekend, we stood on the same hill where he'd first proposed. Under the starlit sky, we exchanged vows again, this time with raw honesty. "I promise to keep learning how to love you better," Daniel said, slipping the ring onto my finger. "I promise to never stop fighting for us," I replied, my voice steady despite the tears. As we stood there, holding hands, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. The scars from our fight would always be there, but they were now a part of our story, a reminder of the love we chose to rebuild, piece by piece. And as we watched the stars together, I knew we were stronger for it.